Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. This is Mona, and if you were not on the call yesterday, we had to do day 3 yesterday due to some technical issues with the training environment. Today we are covering day 2, setting up new items in the new item grid. We are recording the conference today so that I can send out the link to the video. Also send out the link to the PowerPoint as well. Go ahead, if you can, test out your chat feature. If you can hear me and you can see the presentation, please let me know the following. Who is your data sync provider? One World, Open Text, third party, don't know, or none. And then what is your skill level with the new item grid? None, novice, intermediate, advanced. So example, One World, intermediate, or don't know, novice. And if you can, when you send a chat, please be sure to send it to the group. Since I'm in presentation mode, I can't always see the chats that are sent to the host directly. So if you send them to everyone, that makes sure that I actually see them as I'm monitoring the chat on a separate computer. And we will come back to these in just. But again, if you could add a sync provider and your skill level with the new item grid. Real quick, just to go over again some webinar etiquette, please keep your phone on mute when you're not speaking. If you're not listening to the audio from the phone and you're listening to it from the computer, be sure to mute your computer's microphone. This helps to minimize background noise. You can access that by going to Control Panel, Sound, Recording tab. Wait to ask questions until designated times. I'll have the blue bubble graphic with the question mark several times throughout. You can ask questions at any point when that's up. Otherwise, please feel free to submit questions through the chat at any time. Again, as a reminder, please be sure to send that to the group. Please don't send it directly to the host because I will not be able to see that as I'm presenting. So I did ask some questions. I asked for your data sync provider and what your skill level with the new item grid was. So we have a lot of One World syncs of novice, no experience, intermediate. So far I'm seeing mostly One World. Nate, it looks like you don't have a data sync provider. Do you set up your items manually and you don't use data sync? Let's see, I see a third-party provider, SPS. Okay, so you do set them up manually. Okay, so today's session is all about using the new item grid, which is done with a data sync provider. And you should be using that unless you build mixed or sorted cartons. So if you do not build mixed or sorted cartons, I would still recommend that you sit through this so you can see another option for how to build your items. Otherwise, you can always reach out to me through Vendor University if things are not clear after the end of the presentation. Yeah, so most people are using One World. We do have another common one that's OpenText GXS, but I don't see any of those on the call, so that's okay. Looks like most everybody is either a novice or no experience. Okay, thanks so much. So if I'm not able to answer your question through the webinar today, either I miss it through the chat or I just need more information, more details to be able to give you a clearer answer, I'll Vendor University with those details, and I will be sure to get you an answer to your question or direct you to the appropriate party. If you have not been on the call yet this week, my name is Mona, and I'm the Instructional Design and Training Manager for the Vendor and Item Support team. Like I said, yesterday we had to cover Day 3, IMA features, due to some technical issues with the training environment. Today we are covering Day 2, setting up new items in the new item grid. So we're going to learn about IMA access, requirements, help resources, how to use the new item grid, and we're going to go through the whole process, first in a high level through the PowerPoint, and then we're actually going to go into the training environment and walk through setting up an item from start to end. We're also going to talk about the grid history feature. So with manual item build, we actually require use of the data sync provider. The only exceptions for manual item build would be that a carton build cannot be synced if you're doing a mixed carton or an assorted carton or you're actually building palettes in the system. Because if you remember from Monday, Sears cannot have palettes built in the system, but they can still ship palettes. So if you're building them in the system, those cannot be synced, or if you're doing sellable cartons. If you are manually building items and you would be interested in a webinar on manually building items, please email Vendor University at searshc.com. We're trying to determine additional topics for webinars, and whichever topics basically get the largest number of requests are what will be prioritized. And because we'll have to reallocate some resources to design that training. So if that's something that you're interested in, please email Vendor University, let us know so that we can get that out to you sooner than later. So a quick call out I want to give for you. We do offer a service where we can build your items for you. This would probably be most ideal if you only build a few items a year, or you're just not going to build any additional items beyond your initial setup. It does cost $5 a G10, so for most typical items that means $10 per item, $5 for the retail G10, and $5 for the shipping G10. If you would like more information on that service, you can go to Vendor Portal. There's the link right there. There's a, I think at the top of the page in the menu, there's a Vendor Item Build button that you can click for more information. Or you can email vendoritembuild at searshc.com. So objectives today, we're going to cover IMA access and resources. We're going to cover the new item grid, as well as grid history. So first, access. So if you are a brand new vendor and you have never been in IMA yet, you do have to request access as well as sync over items before you'll be given access. So if you are an existing vendor and you just haven't been in IMA before, you do need to request IMA access. We do not allow users to share IDs. That's for security purposes. If someone wants to leave your company that has access to that ID, they could still get in. So each person has to have their own individual ID. So if you do not have separate IDs, then you can request that, but just by going to vendor portal at searshc.com and clicking the Sign Up Now button. If you have an ID but you don't have access to IMA and you've been using someone else's ID to access IMA, this is how you would request access. You would log into the vendor portal and click My Profile in the menu bar, and then scroll down and click IMA, and then select the box next to Item Maintenance Application. Verify all the information and then click Save. And then access will be processed within 2 business days. So like I said, if you're a brand new vendor, before you will be given IMA access, you actually have to sync over items because we do require data synchronization for most of our standard setup. And then to access the application, you can go to Vendor Portal and click IMA under Applications, or you can click IMA up here in the menu bar. And then over on the left side of the screen, under IMA Login, there is a link to access IMA. For system requirements, what single issue does the help desk receive the most calls about? So that would be the internet compatibility. IMA was created to work most optimally with Internet Explorer 8, and it has not yet been updated. So if you use a newer version of Internet Explorer, which I'm sure that you do, you will need to set compatibility view, which we're going to go over in a minute. Also, please be aware that you cannot work in IMA in any other browser besides Internet Explorer. They may allow you to log in. They may allow you to initially get into your task list or view an item, but at some point it's going to basically break on you and you're not going to be able to do the tasks that you need to do to set up your items. So you have to use Internet Explorer to access IMA. Also, we recommend a minimum of 2 gigabytes of RAM as well as the flash player to use the grid editing feature. So if you're not sure what version of Internet Explorer you have, you can hover over Help and go to About. Most likely you will need to set compatibility view. You can do that by going to Tools, Compatibility View Settings, and then under Add This Website, enter mykmart.com, click Add, and click Close. Now, one thing you want to be aware of, I know working on a company-owned computer, you get updates pushed out quite a bit to your computer. We do know a lot of users, whenever they get those updates pushed out, sometimes it will reset their compatibility view settings. And in that case, you have to go in and reset those. So I just wanted to call that out to you because some people will set them and they'll be fine for a few weeks or a few months, and then suddenly it's not working properly for them and they have to call the help desk, and they set the compatibility view settings so they don't realize that that is what the issue is. But sometimes those can be reset whenever you get updates pushed out by your company to your computer. So any questions so far? Okay, we're going to go ahead and talk about IMA resources and help. Within IMA, up at the top above the menu bar, you'll see this Resources button and the Help button. If you click the Resources button, you'll get this drop-down list. Be aware that this list is, some of it's applicable for you as a vendor, some of it's applicable to internal users, some of it's applicable for both. So for you as a vendor, you may be interested in the data synchronization link, the vendor IMA documentation and training. That'll take you to our IMA training page. You also have some quick solutions. There's a link to the vendor IMA portal. And then if you click the help desk, it'll drop down and you can find the help desk phone number as well as a link to a form to contact the help desk. Very top right, if you click the help button, it'll actually open up the IMA help file. And like I said, this is applicable to both vendors and internal users. So for you as a vendor, I would recommend that you start out by clicking the data catalog vendors topic. And then that'll drop down and you'll see several topics below that. And those would all be relevant to you as a data catalog vendor. You can also click index or search to search for something more directly instead of trying to find it in the set of topics. I am aware this file was started back in 2004, I think, and it's been passed down through the different people that have owned it, and I inherited this file. And at some point, we do want to go through and kind of clean it up and make it some of the topics and where they're located a bit more logical in the content navigation. So I'm aware that it may be, you may have a hard time finding what you're looking for in this section. So I recommend checking out the index and search as well to see if that's an easier way for you to locate what you're looking for. But the IMA help file is a great tool. If you reach out to the help desk, you do have to wait for them to respond, and we do have 4 help desk associates that support all of our vendors as well as all of our internal users. So if it's something simple, you may be able to find out the answer yourself very quickly using the help file. Also for training, if you go to the portal and you hover over IMA and go to Training and Guides, this page actually looks a little bit different now. You'll see the training video up at the top of the page, and then below that you will now see the Training and Guides section. Here, circled in red, you see your Data Catalog Vendor Guide. That would be relevant to you as a Data Catalog vendor. Down below, if you work with One World Sync or GXS, these are the map documents. And then below that are some pieces of documentation, such as adding a vendor pack, changing a ship point, cost changes, dimensions and weight guidelines. A lot of stuff that we're covering tomorrow in the maintenance session. We have supporting documentation available here. Also, if you're looking for something more in-depth, more hands-on, we do invite you to our intermediate IMA and workbench that we have on-site here in Hoffman Estates. Unfortunately, we have no possibility of doing any hands-on training via webinar because our training environment can only be accessed for security purposes through our network. So that's just not a possibility that we have. So if you do come to the intermediate training, you will actually get to get into our training environment. and get hands-on experience. You'll work on actually setting up an item from start to end. You'll do some maintenance. We also have a mass change class, and there's plenty of time for questions. We have a study hall, so if you have stuff you're actually working on that you need help walking through, you can do that during the study hall. And we have a 2.5-hour session on a workbench that takes place in the afternoon. The next training is offered October 25th. That is Tuesday. Registration is still open. If you're going to come, I would like for you to register by end of day Thursday, end of day Friday at the absolute latest. So I would go ahead and do that sooner than later. Otherwise, the next offering will be in January. Any questions so far? Okay, we're going to move on to the main topic of today's webinar, the new item grid. So I'd like for you to use your chat and let me know, what is your biggest struggle with the new item grid? I know some of you had said that you don't have any experience at all, so in that case you may not have anything to respond to this question. That's fine. But those of you who have been in the new item grid and have tried working with it, what is your biggest struggle? Keep in mind, like I said, use the chat feature to respond to all, and don't respond just to the host where I won't be able to see your response. So I'll take a look at your responses here in a minute. So moving on, what is the grid? The grid is a Flash-based spreadsheet used to complete product data, and it's used by vendors who send items to IMA using data synchronization. What's really nice about the new item grid is that you can work up to 50 items at a single time. If you're manually building your items, you are building those one at a time, and you're entering information. You have to enter all of the information about those items individually. It can be very, very time consuming. So if you're using data sync, keep in mind that your data sync provider is a completely different company from SHC. So we do not have access to your actual data sync account. So if you're having trouble syncing items over, we can't go into your account directly. So you'll have to reach out to your data sync provider. But as far as the processing times, I know some of the questions that we get, vendors will sync over items, and then they go directly into IMA, and they get confused because it's not there in IMA. Items are not always immediately available after syncing. For One World Sync, the processing happens hourly between 2 a.m. and 11 p.m. And then for open text, it happens 3 times a day at 12 a.m., 4 p.m., and 12 p.m. So just be aware that just because you sync over your items, you have to wait for the processing time from your data sync provider before they'll be sent over to IMA. So many fields can be synced over, but additional fields are required on the grid to set up items in IMA. There are several non-data catalog fields that you can update on the grid. Some of them are listed below. I'm not going to read them all off for you. And let me see. I don't see any responses yet. Okay, it doesn't look like I got any responses for the last question. So I'm assuming that most of you guys don't have any experience in the grid at all then, because you wouldn't have a response. So if you do think of something in particular that you struggle with during the setup process, just let me know. I did get one question just now from Chang. She asked, how do you know if your data was synced in IMA? We will be covering that part during the actual demo when I go into the application. So I will be able to answer that in a minute. But I'm guessing that's something that you might struggle with, so we will go over that. So first we're going to do a really high-level overview with some PowerPoint slides, and then we'll get into the actual application. So when you're accessing the grid, you should hover over Data Catalog and click New Items. So one thing to be aware of is that items in your New Item task list are deleted after 60 days of inactivity. So what that means is if you have synced over items and then you don't touch them after they get over to IMA, after 60 days they're going to automatically be removed from your task list. If you want to make sure that they do not get removed, all you have to do is go in and bring them up in your task list, and you can put them on a grid, and you can either leave the grid out there or you can delete your grid. But if you do something with them, then that 60-day window is going to be reset. And also be aware that you do not receive any sort of email as like a heads up that it's getting ready to be deleted. It's just going to be deleted after 60 days. So again, hover over Data Catalog and click New Items. And then you have to enter search criteria and then click Get Task List. Now you do have to enter at least one criteria prior to selecting Get Task List. And oh, can anyone else hear me? I just saw a note that the audio dropped. I just want to make sure that people can hear me. And then okay. All right. Yvonne, thank you guys for responding, because that's always the worst whenever you're talking and then 2 minutes later you realize no one's been hearing what you've been saying. Okay, Yvonne, I would recommend maybe disconnecting the phone and try reconnecting. If you're connected through your computer, I would recommend trying to connect through your phone. Sometimes basically your connection through your computer is only as good as your Wi-Fi connection. So I would try to reconnect. Thank you guys for letting me know that you could hear me. Okay. So yes, as I was saying, you have to enter at least one search criteria. And I think really the amount of search criteria you enter depends on how much item setup you typically do. If you're syncing over a lot of items at a time on a regular basis, you might want to be more specific with the information you enter. Like you might want to enter your vendor stock number, the style number, in addition to just your paid-ons. If you have multiple paid-ons, you might want to do it by, set up your item by paid-ons number, so you could select a specific paid-ons number to work with. You could select a load date. Let's say if you synced over items 2 weeks ago and you synced over items yesterday, then I would recommend to, sorry, give me 1 second. I just realized that Yvonne, when I told her to disconnect and reconnect, that she wouldn't have been able to hear me. So give me 1 second just to message her and ask her to reconnect her phone. I apologize. Okay, sorry. Moving on. I apologize about that. So you might want to do your load date if you want to focus on items that you synced over 2 weeks ago versus items that you synced over yesterday. If you're looking for just a single G10, then you could enter it directly in either the retail marking number field or the shipping marking number field. But after you enter your information, you can go ahead and click Get Task List, and it's going to load everything that's in your task list. Now this is our training environment, so there are a lot of items for this paid-ons number that I loaded. You probably will not have anywhere near this number of items in your task list, and that's okay. So you would select the item that you want to work over here on the left in the select column, and then click Create Grid. And then you have to enter required information for the grid and click Apply. And real quick, I have a question. I think my data sync was deleted because of inactivity. What do I do? And that is a great question. If your items get deleted by the system for inactivity, all you have to do is resync your items from your data sync provider. So once you resync, they should come back over to IMA, and that 60 days will restart. So whenever you select your items and click Create Grid, it takes you to this page where you have to enter information about all of the items that you're putting in your grid. Now you can work up to 50 items at a time in your grid, but be aware all of the required fields with the red asterisk that you complete on this page, they will apply to all of the items on your grid. So you want to make sure that you are only working items in a single category in your grid, as well as in a single flow type. If you need to work on items that have different categories or different flow types, you're going to have to work those on separate grids. Now for your subcategory, you can have more than one subcategory on a single grid, and you can either select that here or you can select that in the actual grid itself. So, and I do recommend starting out, if you're completely new to the grid, start out just working 1 or 2 assortments at a time before you start trying to work like 8 at a time to get that the 50 item max. Because otherwise it's just going to be confusing until you really acclimate yourself to working in the grid. So once you select your information, then you click Apply, and it will create your grid. The default view is going to be empty required, which you can see right here. And all of your required fields will have the red asterisk. Now, if you have information that's already been synced over that's required, they're not going to display in this default view. You can still access that, and I will show you how to access those fields to update when we get into the system. But be sure to save your grid frequently, because after 30 minutes, it will time out. And so you have to make sure that you're saving it, because if you walk away from your computer and you haven't saved it, then you're going to lose all of the information that you have completed on your grid. I did get another question about if the data sync's deleted because of an activity. I had said that you should resync your items over, and she's asking who to contact to resync. So you have to actually go into your data sync account with OneWorld and resync it from that account. And if you're having trouble figuring out how to do that, I would reach out to your OneWorld contact. And we do have contacts for OneWorld and OpenText. So if you don't have those contacts, you can send me an email, and I will make sure to get those contacts out to you. But you do have to do the resync from the OneWorld sync side. So after you complete all of your fields, you should click Approve. And real quick, some information about working in the grid. There's a lot of information displayed at the top of your grid. So here in the area that's circled in red, you can see that your grid type is in, so it's new. And then you can also see your division and category, as well as your flow type and your DUNS. Now, if any of this information is not correct, say you're working through your grid and you're just reviewing that and you realize that you put it in the wrong category, it should have been category 2. Or you see DC for the flow type and it should have been DSD. If any of that information is correct, the only way to fix it is to actually delete your grid, which you would do right here, and that will return your items to your task list. And then you have to go back to your task list and recreate the grid with your items. And in that setup screen, you have to select the correct information. So that's how you would correct this information up here at the top if it is not correct. And then over here on the right, you will see this lock icon. And that basically is, it helps to unlock your screen, the fields on the screen. If this is locked, everything from this line right here, description line 2, all the way over to the left, it will stay stationary on your screen, and only fields to the right of that will scroll. And that works great if you have a screen with a good resolution, with a larger resolution. If you're working on something smaller, like a small screen to laptop, you may need to unlock by clicking the lock icon so that you can actually scroll across your entire screen, because otherwise you may only see 1 or 2 fields over to the right. So that's what the lock icon does. And I did have a question. If you save the information, does it stay on the screen or does it get saved someplace? If so, where do you go to continue the grid? So when you save it, your screen isn't going to disappear. Your screen will stay exactly where it is. You can walk away at that point and come back the next day, or you can log out of IMA, and you can still re-access it as long as you've saved it. And to do that, you go to the grid history. And I am going to cover grid history at the end of the session today. And that's where you would go to continue it. So we'll cover that at the end of the session today. I will show you how to do that. Up here at the very top on the left, you can see your current view status. It'll display up in the top left corner. Empty required, if you recall, is the default view whenever you start a grid. If you click all, you can actually see every single field that's available for you to edit, whether it's required or not required, completed or not completed. If you know the specific tab that a field is located on, you can actually click the tab here to go directly to that tab, and you can find the field that you're looking for in that tab. The view status right here will change to whichever tab you're on. And then to get back to your default view, you can just click empty required. Now after you've completed fields, if you click this empty required, it'll remove all of the fields you've already completed, so that again you're only seeing the fields that still need your attention. Okay, we're going to do the new item grid demo now. Let me grab my G10 real quick. Okay. All right, so you hover over Data Catalog and go to New Items. So again, this is where you can enter your information. I'm going to enter my G10 directly because there are so many items in that task list that it would take a long time to load if I just did the pay-downs. But you can also enter your vendor stock number or your load date. You can enter your description. Just be aware that it's very particular. So if you have a dash in your description that you synced over, but you leave out the dash here, then it wouldn't come back with any results. Or if you have an extra space. It's very, very specific to the character. So just keep that in mind if you do want to use description as a way to search for in your task list. So after we click Get Task List, it'll load. And so here is where you can check that everything has synced over. Because when you do an initial sync, if everything syncs over successfully, you don't get any sort of notification. You only get a notification if there's an issue. So if you go here, you can click the plus sign next to the carton, and it'll drop down, and you can see all of the eaches that are located in that carton. Now review these, and if there is another each that's supposed to be in this carton and it's not showing, then you need to go back to your data sync account and resync this. Don't work these through yet until you get that other item synced over. So go back and try the resync again. If you're still having issues, reach out to your data sync contact. So to put these in a grid, you select the box in the select column. Now you don't have to go through and select each of these. Whenever you select a carton and you click Create Grid, it's going to automatically bring everything in that carton into your grid. Another quick call out I want to give, if you bring up your task list and you do have a lot of items in your task list and you want to narrow it more, you can do that by using these filters down at the bottom of your screen. Again, you could use description if you'd like. You can do change type. So if you're looking for your new items, you can click New. Remember, if you sync over any changes, those will be located in this task list, and you can locate them via the change type. It's going to be CHG for change. If you sync over new vendor packs, under change type, those would be listed as OPR new. So that's how you can tell if an item is new, if it's a change, or if it's a new vendor pack. And then over on the right, you also have vendor stock number to sort by, as well as your load date. So once you select your carton you want to put on your grid, you would click Create Grid. And, okay, Yvonne, yeah, if you missed yesterday and you missed the first part of today, yesterday there were some technical issues with the training environment, so I could not do the new item grid demo. So we did day 3 yesterday, and today we're doing day 2. If you would like me to send you day 2's video, just send me an email to vendoruniversity@SiriusHC.com and I'll get the video link sent out to you for the day 3 content that we covered yesterday. So sorry for any confusion with that. So here on this page, this is where you select the information about your grid. This is applied to everything that's on the grid. So you would select your division. We also have to select our order dones. Now for you, since you're not a super user, I believe you would just have a drop-down list of your order dones. I actually have to search for it. Quick call out I want to make. If you have the option to select one with ORD or PAY, pay, make sure that you select an order dones. If you select a pay dones, then you're not going to have any options under flow type. It'll be completely blank. You won't be able to select any flow type. So if you run into that, that's the cause of it. You selected a pay dones instead of an order. For the category, you just select it from the drop-down. I'm going to go ahead and select my subcategory here as well. And then you can select your flow type. Now you should be receiving some information from your buying team or your inventory team, most likely your buying team. It may be called a buy sheet or a wing. It might be an Excel file. It could just be an email. But it should have some information on how you're supposed to be doing your item setup, such as what the hierarchy is supposed to be. If you have multiple duns, it might list what duns they want you to use if they want you to use a specific one. Your flow type, if it's supposed to be DC, DSD. So if you're not getting this information, then reach out to your buying team and ask for it, because unless you set up your items the exact same way every single time, you should be getting that information from them. And if you do not have the option to select the flow type that they're wanting you to select, let's say we did the drop-down and they wanted you to select DSD, but it wasn't an option here, what that means is that your DUNS number has not been set up for that flow type. So I would first double check the information they gave you, that you're trying to select the flow type that they're wanting you to select. I would double check that you're using the DUNS they're wanting you to use. And if that's the case, they are going to need to put in a request for that flow type to be added to your DUNS so you can select it. So once you select your information, you would go ahead and click Apply. And then it's going to work on creating your grid. Now you can put up to 50 items on your grid. Do be aware the more items that you try to put on your grid, the longer it's going to take for the processing to save it, to approve it, and especially for the initial creation of your grid. So if it takes a few minutes, just be patient. That's not abnormal. So just be patient and wait for your grid to load. So here you can see up at the top, we're in our empty required default view. These are all fields that need attention, that have to be completed before we can approve the grid. So we're going to walk through and complete all of these fields. So we're going to start off with brand. You can just start typing your brand. It'll come up with all of the options that match. And one of the nice features that you will see with this is whenever you're at the each level, or like the UPC level, you can copy down the information so that you don't have to select it for each one. And if you have a lot of items on your grid, it would copy down to all of the eaches on the grid. Now some of these you do still have to select it separately for the cartons, but still it's great that it saves you time with the eaches by copying down. So here with the weight, you may very likely sync over your dimensions and weights for not just your eaches but also your cartons. But I wanted to leave this here just to show you, if you're entering information for your weight, you can see that each weighs 1 pound. However, in this assortment there are 6 eaches in the assortment. So when you're figuring out the weight for the carton, you would not just add up what you see here, because that would just be 4, but there's actually 6 in the carton. So you want to make sure that your carton weight, as well as the dimensions, make sense for the total number of pieces actually in that. So since there's 6 eaches actually going into this carton, then we know the weight should actually be 6, not 4, even though you only see 4 ones listed here. So that's a mistake that vendors make often. Here for a country of origin, you can just start typing your country of origin. It'll locate it. You can click Add. You can add multiple countries. And then you can click Copy Down to copy down all of the information. HTS code. If you remember, we talked about HTS codes a bit on Monday. They populate a list of what's going into the truck for the truck driver. So if you click search, it narrows down this list, and I know it can be difficult to find an exact match, but you just find whatever is the closest match, and then you can click add, and then copy down. Fabric metal content, since this is an apparel item, we have to select the fabric. These are in alphabetical order. So we're going to select cotton. We're going to add that. And then let's say that there's a second fabric. We'll do cotton jersey as well. Now with fabric and metal content, you do have to add a percentage. So that percentage has to add up to 100, depending on however many you've selected. So since we have 2, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. We will do 70 and 30, and then we can copy that down. So next we have some hazard questions. So to view the questions in their entirety, you can just hover over the question in the header, and there you can see it's asking if this product or accompanying accessory contains any of the following. There are some exceptions to that, such as apparel, appliances, and so forth. Now again, be sure that you answer this question correctly. If you do not know the answer, please talk to someone else at your company. You may recall the story I told on Monday about the camping, the gas for camping. They ended up on an airplane and started a fire, and that's because these questions were not answered correctly. So here it's asking if the product contains PVC. And this one is asking if the packaging of the product contains PVC. So, and you see this double arrow pointing down. Whenever you see the double arrow pointing down, you can click that, and it'll copy that information down to the fields below. So Lindsay is asking, are the required fields different based on what type of item it is? For instance, I will be inputting chocolate items that will not have a fabric metal component. Yes, that is a great call out. The required fields will be different based on your business. So like she said, like for chocolate items, you're not going to have a fabric metal content. That'd be kind of odd to have fabric and metal in your chocolates. Another example would be, let's say if you have DVDs, those oftentimes have street dates where they cannot be sold before a specific date. So that may be a required field for you. So that will depend based on your business and your actual item. It also depends on what you're actually seeing on this default screen. It will depend on what you sync over. So you may not see the same exact fields that I'm walking through right now. You might not see them in the same exact order. You may have synced over some of these additional fields, such as like the weight. It was blank for the carton, but you could have put that over. So you're not always going to see it in the same exact order or these same exact fields. That was a great call out. Thank you. So moving on, the next field that I have is hazard storage code. So this is just a list. We're going to choose not hazardous since it's apparel, but there are some different options such as aerosols, flammable liquids, oils, oxidizing chemicals. There is also, I just want to call this out, there's one for pet food and pet chews, and there's also one for food products, as well as infestable grain-based products. I think that would be for like gardening maybe. So if you work in pets or food, then I know it's hazard storage code, but basically it lets us know how it needs to be stored. If there's an expiration date on the item, we need to know that. If it's a food product, for example, I know those cannot be stored directly next to chemicals. So that's another reason why this field is very important, that it is correct so we can store product correctly. So I'm going to choose not hazardous since this is apparel. Then moving on over, we see our cost. So you have to enter it for your eaches, and you will see this, you do have a cost and a member cost. You do have to enter it for both. But one of the nice things, when you enter it for a member cost, it automatically populates the cost for the carton. So then you can just copy that same cost over to the carton cost instead of calculating it manually. From there, we have the primary store format. So we're going to choose Kmart. If this was a Sears item, you would have more Sears options, but this is not a Sears item, so it's just Kmart. So again, whenever you see this double down arrow, you can click that and it's going to copy that information all the way down through your eaches. Just went too far, one sec. Next we have our ship points. Now if you are setting up DSD vendor packs, you do still have to set up vendor packs if you're shipping DSD. However, you do not have to select ship points. If you are doing something like DC, you do have to select ship points. And we will be talking more about ship points tomorrow during the maintenance session, as well as how to set different ship points for different DCs or how to change them after it is operational. We will be discussing that more tomorrow. Next we have our vendor applied EAS tag. Again, that's like a security tag that they use on clothes most often in some stores, where if you get too close to the door, it'll make the alarm sound. And then we have our projected first in-store date. So you don't have to stress out too much about the in-store date. This is more for informational purposes. So if it's a day or two off, it is not a big deal. You don't have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out the exact day. Next we have one of our California Prop 65 questions. And again, if you hover over the heading, it will display the question in full. Does your item require a California Prop 65 warning? And those are your available responses. So we're going to select that it's tested and does not contain any Prop 65 chemicals. And your second question, again, if you hover over it, it's basically the same, or it's asking if there's a warning label on the package for California Prop 65. We're going to say no. Real quick, before I move on, I just want to show you, you should save your grid. You want to make sure that you save it. And once you do, up here at the top, this icon with the red exclamation point, it'll change to the grid icon with a green check mark to show that it has been initially saved. It won't go back to the red exclamation point once you make more changes. It just does that for the initial save. And then once you have saved your grid, and it does take more time to save that initial save versus the subsequent saves after that first one. But it'll update your default view, and which is what I want to show you. So you can update your default view by clicking empty required again. And now you see it did keep these. It tends to keep these when you go to, even though they're completed. But it did get rid of all of your other fields that have been completed, and now you can just focus on that one field that you missed. You missed the EAS tag required indicator. If you remember, it's probably not a great example because we did select one, but that field is located on both the item tab and the vendor pack tab, so it's on there twice. So that's why we're seeing that again. Didn't mean for that to be confusing. Apologize. So once we select that, all of our fields are done. So we can click Approve. And then it takes you to your grid history screen. So we're going to go back to the PowerPoint for a second, and then we're going to come back to this screen. But you do see that right now it is queued, and it will automatically refresh if you just leave it here. But you can actually go ahead and start working on another set of items, or you can leave IMA completely, and it's still going to work on processing your items for you while you go work on something else. All right, so next real quick we're going to talk about grid history. If you do exit out of IMA or go to another screen in IMA, to re-access your grid history, you hover over Data Catalog and then click Grid History. You can enter your search criteria and click Search. So my recommendation is to start off by entering your user ID. If you enter your user ID, you will see all grids that you have touched, all grids that you've initiated. So anything that you've been working on, you will see by entering your user ID. Now, if you process a ton of items all the time and you want to narrow that list down more, you can always select your grid type or your DUNS that's associated with that grid, the flow type associated with that grid. But I think user ID is going to be sufficient for most of you. So it'll display everything that you've touched. This is the list right here. And over here on the left, you can see your status as well as the status description. We have queued, that's what we initially saw right after we hit the approve button. Then it went to busy because it was processing. Once it goes past busy, you're either going to get back check for errors or completed. Now if you initiate a grid and you don't save it, you'll see this grid icon with the red exclamation point, and that just means that it's been initiated but it was never saved. And then if a grid is active, meaning that you have saved it, you'll see the grid icon with the green check mark. And to re-access your grid, you would click the grid button over here on the right. Now, once you approve your grid, if there are no errors and it gets approved, you will not be able to re-access your grid. So if you need to record your KSNs at that point, you need to record them before you hit the approve button. Because once you hit that approve button, you won't be able to view the grid again. If you want to, you could even take screenshots of your grid if you don't have the time to write them down. But otherwise, you would have to either search one by one with quick search in your G10 to get the KSN number, or you'd have to reach out to your buying team. If you mentioned grid, if you remember, I mentioned grid type is one of the criteria that you can select for narrowing your list. Yesterday, during the IMA features, we went over some of the other types of grids that you can do, such as the changes grid, return new item grid, and return changes grid. And those are the codes for that. And now I'm going to go back so you can see what it looks like. Here you can see that the status of your item now has the green check mark, as well as it says completed in your status. Something else that can be useful is you can actually see when a grid was created and when it was last updated. If you're trying to figure out what happened to items, and because a lot of times grids get initiated and they don't get approved, you can go back in here and sometimes that can help you kind of fill in some of the details. You can also see the initial number of items on the grid, how many items you put on the grid, as well as the remaining number of items. So if you have several assortments on your grid and you click approve, and some of those assortments don't get any errors, those are going to go ahead and be approved. And then if there are some assortments that do have errors, you would see here remaining number of items. They would be listed here. So this number can differ from the initial number of items. Now if you have errors, you will see I think it's like a yield icon, and it says check for errors. And to check for errors, you have to click the grid button, and then you can actually go back into your grid, and you can access your errors from there. And give me 1 second, because I meant to actually purposely create an error, and I forgot. So I'm going to try to load up another grid real quick just so I can show you how to access the errors and view the errors. So give me 1 second. Okay, so while the task list is loading, I'm going to go ahead and do the key points to remember slide. So key things that you want to remember, you want to double check that all items have synced over for a carton before working the items through a grid. Your buyer should be providing key information for item setup, such as your DUNS, your flow, your store format if it's Sears or Kmart, SHC hierarchy, the required carton types, and agreed upon cost. So if they aren't providing you this information and you don't know what it should be, if it's not the same thing every single time, you need to reach out to your buying team and ask for this information. You also want to double check that carton dimensions and weights are correct. Because if you remember when we went over the carton dimensions and weights guidelines on Monday, the cube sum has to correlate properly for the carton depending on the number of pieces that are in that carton. So it wouldn't make sense if the space allowed in the carton is less than what's required for the items in reality to actually fit in there. And finally, be sure to save your grid frequently so that you do not lose your changes that you make on your grid. And I'm going to go back, create a new grid. I do want to show you an error and what that looks like. I'm not going to complete all the fields. I'm just going to click approve, and it's going to come back with a lot of errors since I didn't complete anything. But I did want to show you that so that you know how to resolve errors. So while that's loading, are there any questions? I know a lot of times it may seem a little overwhelming until you actually get in there and get your hands on it and try to actually work items through. Once you've done it a few times, I think it comes a lot more naturally. It doesn't seem so cumbersome, and it makes a lot more sense to you. But it's just one of those things you have to get your hands on in order to understand. It's still loading. Does anyone have any questions at all? But we will, there we go. Okay, so whenever you have errors, you click your grid icon over on the right, which that's also how you can re-access an active or inactive grid as well, or initiated grid, not inactive. And it'll reload your grid. And then up at the top of the screen, you are going to see this red bar. It'll tell you how many errors and warnings you have. Again, there's quite a lot because I didn't complete any information on this. So there's two different ways that you can view your errors. You can either click this plus sign, and then you can scroll down and view all of your errors. Here on the left, you can see the details. We know that this one has to do with the package. And then there's the field as weight. The type is warning. So technically, you can actually ignore warnings. But then you can also see your message if you need more information on what the actual error is. In this example, it's item, so it's something with the item. The EAS tag required indicator says required tag indicator not populated. So in that instance, you would know that you forgot to populate that field. And let's find one more. We have package in this example, and here it lists several several fields under package. And basically, it's just saying that these are not populated. Another way that you can view your errors is you can click View Errors in New Window. It'll come up in a new window, and if you have a lot of errors, that might be an easier method to review them. You could also, I don't know if you could print this or not, but you could take screenshots and print it. But it would just be an easier way to review them if you do have a lot of errors. And then one final call out, whenever you have errors, sometimes they will display in the default view and they'll be highlighted in red, but that is not the case for every field. It only does that for specific fields. So I did want to give you a call on that. So if it's not located on this page when it has an error, you have to actually either click all to bring all the fields up and locate the field, or you can go to the tab if that field is located on. All right, so any other questions at all? Okay, I will stay on the line for a few more minutes. I know it's 3:01 right now. So I will see the rest of you tomorrow for the final session for the webinar series, day 4. We're going to go over a lot of different bits that we can do in IMA and walk through those in IMA itself like we were doing today with the grid. I will stay on the line, and it looks like Heather has a question. But otherwise, I will see all of you tomorrow. Have a great day.